This is a very short chapter, 6 verses, so the class probably won't be too awfully long, I wouldn't think. But here we are circling back around to Egypt and Ethiopia, and if you remember the last couple chapters, chapters 18 and chapter 19, we discussed more in depth about Ethiopia and Egypt. And here we are in chapter 20 talking about both of them. So this morning, we'll go ahead and get started. And first verse here. So in verse 1 it says, "In the year that Tartan came unto Ashdod, when Sargon the king of Assyria sent him, and fought against Ashdod and took it." So when you read this verse and you see this word Tartan, you know, it's capitalized, and the first thought that you want to have is it must be somebody's name. But the more you dig a little deeper, it's not a person's name, but it's more so a person's title. So would anyone want to venture to guess what this word stands for? Well, it does mean an Assyrian, but it also has a rank structure to it amongst the Assyrians.
Like a governor or something?
Well, so let's see here.
A prince, maybe?
So when you look up this word, and one of my cross references actually calls it out as a commander-in-chief. And this word, this isn't the first time this word's used. It's actually used in another place. If you want to turn to 2 Kings, let's see, 2 Kings chapter 18.
Yeah, that's what they call the president of this country, commander-in-chief.
Yeah. And if you remember in this time period, they had kings. So this guy would be basically a step down from the king. So let's see here, 2 Kings chapter 18. If I ever get there. All right. 2 Kings chapter 18 and verse 17. We have this word used yet again. It says, "And the king of Assyria sent Tartan and Rabsaris and Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah with a great host against Jerusalem. And they went up and came to Jerusalem, and when they were come up, they came and stood by the conduit of the upper pool, which is left in the fuller's field." So in this verse, it brings in 2 more titles, in which, Mark, you were absolutely right. When you look up the original meaning of this word Tartan, it's associated directly with an Assyrian. So here in 2 Kings 18, we have Tartan being used, which I've still got cross references here that says commander-in-chief, and then it's got Rabsaris, which I've got a cross reference for a chief officer, and then the Rabshakeh, which would stand for a title of chief of staff or governor. So we have some, like I said, it's always good to dig a little deeper into the words that we're reading here, that this isn't actually some guy's name. but indeed this is a rank structure from the Assyrian army, military, government. So in the year that Tartan, the second in command, came unto Ashdod, when Sargon, the king of Assyria, sent him and fought against Ashdod and took it. So we're basically laying out the situation of what's getting ready to unfold. So Sargon the second, when you look in history, Sargon the second was king of Assyria, and he reigned from 722 BC to 705 BC. So this would be the Sargon that's being discussed here, that would have been the king at the time that Assyria came into Ashdod and overtook it. And when you look a little deeper into the history of Sargon II, he was known as a very great king for the Assyrians. He was still wicked, but they viewed him as one of their best kings in history because he was a good ruler, and they overcame a lot of territory while he was in reign. And when he died, he actually died in battle, and they actually never found his body. So their superstition on all that was because they could never find his body and do their proper ceremonies, is that it was viewed as a curse for the people. So just an interesting side note. He died in battle much later on, and his body was never recovered. So we have Tartan, we discussed. We have Sargon, which would have been Sargon II. And then here we have Ashdod being discussed. So does anyone know anything about Ashdod? Does anyone know whether Ashdod is a person or a place? Okay, very good. So anyone know anything more about Ashdod? Where it's located? You know, what kind of city it was?
Was there an idol?
Egypt.
Yeah. Matter of fact, it's all dealing with the ark, if I'm not mistaken. The ark actually resided in Ashdod. And then I believe that's when the golden emeralds and all that stuff took place. Trying to think of where that's mentioned. I didn't note that down, but yeah, Ashdod did play a part in that whole event. It's escaping me though as to where that's at right now. But as far as Ashdod and its location and it being a city, does everyone have maps in the back of their Bibles? I've got a map, and it's called The Kingdom of David and Solomon, that shows Ashdod on it. And when I look at it, it's in the land of Philistia, and it looks like it's maybe several miles off the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Is that where it's at? 1 Samuel 5? That's right. So, you know what? That wouldn't be a bad event since we're talking about Ashdod. That was a pretty key event in history here for the people. So, why don't we look at that event? And you said it's where at?
Part of it is, 1 Samuel chapter 5, something in the middle.
1 Samuel chapter 5. Yeah, I think that's when Ashdod is first mentioned there. Yeah, would somebody want to read that? And we can see a pretty key event that happened in the people's past that would have dealt with Ashdod.
Which verses?
I'm thinking we just read chapter 5.
Okay, I can do it. And the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer unto Ashdod. When the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again. And when they arose early in the morrow morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. Therefore neither the priests of Dagon nor any that come into Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod unto this day. But the hand of the Lord was heavy upon them of Ashdod, and he destroyed them, and smote them with emerods, even Ashdod and the coasts thereof. And when the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, The ark of the God of Israel shall not abide with us, for his hand is sore upon us, and upon Dagon our God. They sent therefore and gathered all the lords of the Philistines unto them, and said, What shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they answered, Let the ark of the God of Israel be carried about unto Gath. And they carried the ark of the God of Israel about thither. And it was so, that after they had carried it about, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a very great destruction. And he smote the men of the city, both small and great, and they had emerods in their secret parts. Therefore they sent the ark of God to Ekron, and it came to pass, as the ark of God came to Ekron, that the Ekronites cried out, saying, They have brought about the ark of the God of Israel to us, to slay us and our people. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines, and said, Send away the ark of the God of Israel, and let it go again to his own place, that it slay us not and our people. For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there, and the men that died not were smitten with the emerods, and the cry of the city went up to heaven.
All right, so I guess a little bit of back history here. In chapter 4, we have it, the ark was taken from Shiloh, and it was taken from Shiloh in chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. And then picking up in verses 5 through 11, the ark was captured in a battle that was taking place with the Philistines. And then from that point up to where you started reading, Angie, chapter 5, is when the ark made its way down to Ashdod in this temple of Dagon. So Ashdod in the land of the Philistines, it was a Philistine city. And when you look at 12 tribes, Ashdod falls within the land of Judah, which is who we're talking about here. So it's all connecting, the geography of it all, the history of it all. So Ashdod actually fell to the Assyrians in 711 BC. So this is the time frame that we're talking about here, when this city was overtaken and captured by the Assyrians under the command of Sargon II, which at the time was king of Assyria. So lots of history laid out in just simply the first verse here when we look at this. And let's see here. I have a note here that was interesting, is that the capture of Ashdod by Sargon II was actually confirmed through some historical writings that was done under Sargon II during his reign. So he made some comments about this. It says, Azariah, king of Ashdod, had schemed not to deliver tribute anymore and sent messages full of hostilities against Assyria to the kings. And on account of the misdeed which he thus committed, I abolished his rule over the inhabitants of his country. I besieged and conquered the cities of Ashdod, Gath, and Ashdodimu, whatever, however you pronounce that word. So it is documented through some writings of Sargon II of when he went down and captured Ashdod, and the whole reason for his even going down there to do this is because they decided they didn't want to pay tribute anymore to the Assyrians. So he was going down there to show them basically who's boss. So this is an interesting chapter. As we go through the rest of it here in verse 2, it says, At the same time spake the Lord by Isaiah the son of Amos, saying, Go and loose the sackcloth from off thy loins, put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. And the Lord said, Like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians prisoners and the Ethiopians captives, young and old, naked and barefoot, even their buttocks uncovered, to the shame of Egypt. And they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, their expectation, and of Egypt, their glory. And the inhabitant of the isle shall say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, whether we flee for help or to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? So, I said this is interesting because God instructed Isaiah to basically dress up and give the appearance of what you would consider a slave. You know, loose the sackcloth from thy loins, put off thy shoe from thy foot. And he did so. And it says walking naked and barefoot. And when I look up this word naked, you know what? I meant to get my Bible program up here. Let's see. Show taskbar.
Cross-reference from Matthew 3:4.
Would you mind reading that as I get this going?
Matthew 3:4 says, And the same John had his raiment of camel's hair and a leathern girdle about his loins, and his meat was locusts from wild things. So they weren't totally naked.
No, and that's what I was getting ready to show. Let's see here. Walking naked.
It's kind of like you down to your underwear, I guess.
Let's see here. Let me look at the verse. Verse 4. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that Isaiah walked around just completely naked.
Because verse 4 kind of gives you the idea how it went.
He would have been probably less clothed than what he would want to
He
be.
would have a robe or a shirt on, and shoes on.
Basically, it was showing the shame that was going to take place on Egypt and Ethiopia.
Yeah, like it says in verse 4, how they were shamed.
Well, I'm sure I'll gather my thought here in a second on this, but we can go back to looking at this. So he was going to basically be a living illustration of this sign. And as you can see there, he was going to do this for 3 years. So, and the Lord said, like as my servant Isaiah hath walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and a wonder upon Egypt and of Ethiopia. So we have I guess, more of a symbolic act to show this sign and this coming judgment and this shame that was going to come on these people of Ethiopia and Egypt. Like I said, a living illustration that Isaiah is literally looking in the appearance of a slave that would have lots of shame, and all of this was a symbol of the people of Egypt and Ethiopia in verse 4 when they're led away prisoners and captives, young and old, naked, barefoot, even their buttocks uncovered, in the shame of Egypt. So all of this was to symbolize the shame that was going to come on these people. And matter of fact, you know, I said earlier it was interesting in this chapter, and the reason I said it was interesting is because Isaiah is doing a living illustration for this prophecy that's going to come about. I mean, they can visually see him and how he looks and how he's walking around, and they can see the shame that's going to end up being brought on them. And we actually have some other prophets that did the same thing. They had living illustrations, and one of them is Jeremiah. And this wasn't uncommon to happen. I mean, God wanted it to be pointed out, very obvious, of the shame that sin is going to bring on you if you're disobedient. But if you go to Jeremiah in chapter 13, we do have some examples here of some more illustrations of where God does this to get his point across. So in Jeremiah 13, and maybe somebody would want to read the first 11 verses, we have another illustration in which is taking place to get a point across. Okay?
Thus saith the Lord unto me, Go and get thee a linen girdle, and put it upon thy loins, and put it not in the water. So I got a girdle according to the word of the Lord, and put it on my loins. And the word of the Lord came unto me the second time, saying, Take the girdle that thou hast got, which is upon thy loins, and arise, go to Euphrates, and hide it there in a hole of the rock. So I went and hid it by Euphrates, as the Lord commanded me. And it came to pass after many days that the Lord said unto me, Arise, go to Euphrates, and take the girdle from thence, which I commanded thee to hide there. Then I went to Euphrates, and digged and took the girdle from the place where I hid it. And behold, the girdle was marred, it was profitable for nothing. Then the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Thus saith the Lord, After this manner will I mar the pride of Judah, and the great pride of Jerusalem, this evil people which refuse to hear my words, which walk in the imaginations of their heart, and walk after other gods, to serve them and to worship them, shall even be as this girdle, which is good for nothing. For as the girdle cleaveth to the loins of a man, so have I caused to cleave unto me the whole house of Israel and the whole house of Judah, saith the Lord, that they might be unto me for a people and for a name and for a praise and for a glory, but they will not hear.
So the lesson here in the message that's being pointed out is, so just like this girdle was marred, as it said here in the verses, and actually marred is another word for ruined, from what I can see. Just as this girdle was marred and ruined, so will God mar or wound or ruin the pride of Judah that they were suffering with, that they were guilty of having pride, in which this isn't the first instance we've read that Judah had issues with pride. So yet again, another living illustration, and this time here it's recorded in Jeremiah. And there are several more that I don't really see we would need to go through. But so going back to Isaiah and the message that he's trying to get across. So here we have Egypt and Ethiopia. They were going to be led away captive, and they were going to have shame put on them. And in verse 6, it says, and the inhabitant of the isle shall say in that day, behold, such is our expectation, whether we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? So 3 years before the fall of Ashdod, Isaiah was living this warning, this symbolic warning that was pointing out to the people of Judah, and his message of humiliation, his message of, I guess, destitution directed first towards Egypt, and then second, the message was for Judah. So all of this, if you remember in the past couple chapters, all of this was because of the fear of the people, their lack of confidence that God could take care of them, and their impatience to try to take matters into their own hands. So if you remember correctly, Judah was being tempted by forming alliances with Egypt and Ethiopia so that they could become their own power up against the Assyrians, when the whole time God is saying, you guys need to have patience. Things are going to work out on my time frame. You need to have faith in me that I'm your shield and your protector. But Judah did not have that kind of faith. So these alliances were not favored in God's eyes. It showed a lack of faith and a lack of patience on their part. So there is a message here, and it's 10:32. There is a message here that we can take away from this, and it's a message that we can have some application for us today. So when we look at these events and we see that Isaiah had this physical appearance of shame and this reminder for the people that they could see him and realize that, you know what, going down that path against God's way is not going to be good for us. It's going to bring shame on us. So they're seeing all this, and really we can see what God's viewpoint is on sin, period. I mean, throughout the whole book of Isaiah, we've seen that God frowns on sin. Isaiah has been pleading with the people in every chapter, repent, 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 change your ways, get back on God's right side. And here we have this living illustration that's taken place. So God's view on sin, one thing we can see is that sometimes it's necessary to bring sinful behaviors out in the open publicly so that the people can see it. We can see that sin should be continually condemned. I mean, for 3 straight years, Isaiah had the appearance of a slave, daily reminding everybody of the shame that is going to be brought on the people of Egypt and Ethiopia, and the judgment also on Judah for all these alliances that they're taking place in. So sin is being pointed out, and I said earlier that we would have an application for us today. So think about what's happening here in this chapter of sin being pointed out, and then think about Christians today. I mean, what's one of our responsibilities today as Christians?
Point out sin.
It's to point out sin. And, you know, matter of fact, in Ephesians chapter 5, you know, we can have an example. And there's many other examples too, but in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 11, it says, "And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. For it is a shame even to speak of those which are done of them in secret." So one of the mindsets of a Christian is for one to always beware of our actions, making sure we're not falling into the temptations of the world, we're not falling into sinful behaviors. So that's one of our responsibilities. The other responsibility is when we do see sin, we're to point that out and try to help people out of that lifestyle. And Isaiah is doing that. He's pointing out the sinful behavior. He's showing the shame. And basically all of this is to send a message to the people of saying, you know, this is where you're headed. You're headed to the shame that's mentioned here, the shame of Egypt. You're headed there. Ethiopia, you're headed to captivity. Egyptians are headed as prisoners. Judah, if you don't listen and you don't have faith in God, and you keep trying to form these alliances with these other nations, then guess what? You're going to have shame also. And for us today, we're to point out the fact that sin's going to bring shame on anybody who chooses to live that kind of lifestyle. Very short chapter. I know it is. Any comments, any additions, anything you'd like to know about a little deeper as far as subject matter? And if not, then I guess we can say that will end class. And next week we'll pick up looking at some different nations and some judgments. So we'll end there.